of Art History 565. This is Team 2's presentation. The reduced importance of Hegelianism, combined with the resurgence of empiricism and connoisseurship, along with the importance of cultural history and the social history of art, contributed to the nature of art history during the 20th century. The Hegelian view of the world was seen as contributing to Nazism. However, this view was corrupted. In the 1930s, German-speaking scholars migrated to the English-speaking world, where they were influenced by intellectual communities in which the standards of empiricism held pride of place. Pragmatic metaphysics characterized this period in the analysis of style and iconography applied to a wide range of subjects as found in the writings of Erwin Panofsky. The work of Henri Fauchelevent exemplifies the humanizing of Hegelian methods and is similar to that of Wolflin in that he believed forms change over time in accordance with the principles of style and are equally at the mercy of other desperate influences. The work of Nicholas Pevsner relates to the empiricism of Morelli. The rise in the study of the individual artist, supported by the methods of empiricism and connoisseurship, was contributed to the decline of Hegelianism and the effects of modernism on art history. Cultural history and its association with humanism, which was untainted by political extremism, became the defining approach of the period. The tradition of cultural history in art history is best represented by E. H. Gombrich, who utilized variety in terms of approaches and periods in which he studied. Gombrich based his understanding on the history of art through the application of psychology. The social history of art was based on the Marxist thesis that the economic base conditions the cultural superstructure, and that as a result, styles vary according to the character of the dominant class. This approach was based on the work of Marxist art historians such as Friedrich Antel and Arnold Hausner, after the work of Meyer Shapiro. The introduction, titled Mechanisms of Meaning in Petrossi's The Art of Art History, begins the discussion of discovering methodologies that incorporate formal interpretation of form with contextual interpretation in order to make meaning. The chapter begins by posing various questions, such as, where and when does a properly art historical interest, assuming it really does exist in the first place, actually begin or end? When and under what conditions and for whom is the analysis of an artwork adequate or sufficient? And is the domain of interest of an academic field, such as art history, fixed or fluid? Exactly how is the latter dependent upon what are regarded as properly artistic entities or artifacts? Is art history a what or a when? Does an observer or analysis work art historically only under certain conditions, following accepted routines of analysis and attention? Or are any such routines or methods more or less circumstantial, defined in relation to the kinds of objects potentially available for attention? These questions have no clear answers, and when these questions are posed, other issues or problems arise of philosophical, ethical, political, cultural, social, commercial, or theological nature. Our previous readings have focused on the what artworks signify, and this chapter introduces us to the how of the various ways artwork is understood. This chapter also introduces us to Erwin Panofsky and his methodology of iconography and iconology. Erwin Panofsky developed one of the most famous and influential art methods, the iconographical and iconological method. Iconography refers to the subject matter in artworks. Panofsky develops his theory by confronting and synthesizing the thinking of others. The three stages of his method are reflected by three intellectual influences. Rigel and Wolflin's research influenced his first step, the pre-iconographical step. Warburg Library scholars shape his second step, the iconographical analysis. And finally, Cassier's philosophy influences his third step, the iconological interpretation. Aby Warburg was known as the founding father of the iconographic iconological approach. He developed a method he called critical iconology from art historical research he conducted from his own private library. This method consisted of the discovery and tracing of motifs through different cultures and visual forms. Ernst Cassirer. Panofsky was inspired by Cassier's work. They both shared an interest in the philosopher Immanuel Kant and the period of Renaissance Neoplatonism. According to Cassirer, people impose order and create meaning of the chaos. These symbolic forms can vary in meaning, but all, having their origins in specific cultures, are subject to change throughout history. Both Cassirer and Panofsky's final ambition was to connect the symbolic content of a work of art with the kind of mind-world relation being articulated in other spheres of the culture, and set the whole process in relation to the fundamental structures of the human mind. Panofsky was interested in the relationship between visualization and thought. He agreed with Reigel's idea that art was a specific form of visual expression. However, he disagreed with Wolflin's idea that artistic forms of vision change independently and could be expressed at different times. As a result, Panofsky came up with cognitive principles for art creation, which embodied 5 pairs of oppositions. They are as follows: plentitude and form, time and space, optical values and haptic values, depth and surface, merging forms, and division. Later, Panofsky goes on to write his most famous essay on art history, The Perspective as Symbolic Form, in 1927, which went on to influence many other branches of the humanities. Panofsky usually began an explanation regarding the use of his art method with an everyday example that would be easy to understand. Then he would continue to outline and explain each step. The pre-iconographical step needs knowledge of practical experience in the world, while the iconographical needs knowledge of concepts and specific themes relating to different historical conditions. The last step, iconological, involved the personal psychology of the interpreter. Moreover, Panofsky explained that this process was not to be followed step by step, but all at the same time. Panofsky applied his art method by interpreting one of Albrecht Dürer's engravings entitled Melancholia I of 1514. Hatt and Klonck go on to explain this process in great detail. Panofsky had many great admirers to his art method, yet others had a number of objections and concerns. The 3 main concerns regarding Panofsky's new art method were: does Panofsky over-intellectualize art? What kind of history is at stake in Panofsky's art? And is Panofsky's homogenized view of the past defensible? This chapter, The Iconography and Iconology, An Introduction to the Study of Renaissance Art by Panofsky, which is printed in Przowski's book, begins by pointing out how iconography deals with the subject matter or meaning of art rather than strict form. Panofsky gives an example, an everyday example, of a man tipping his hat as a sign of greeting or hello. He refers to the actions of the man, meaning the tipping of the hat, as identifying form. Making a connection to the gesture requires experience and knowledge to understand that the action of the tipping of a hat towards another means hello. He then breaks down this method into steps. His first step is the primary or natural subject matter. This is the identifying of pure form, such as line, color, or certain particularly shaped lumps of bronze or stone as representations of natural objects such as human beings, animals, plants, houses, tools, and so forth. His second step is secondary or conventional subject matter. It is the realizing what the figure represents. So, for instance, a male figure with a knife may represent St. Bartholomew. His third step is intrinsic meaning or content. That is the underlying principle which reveal the basic attitude of a nation, a period, a class, a religious or philosophical persuasion. So that's basically the interpretation or the meaning of the piece. Panofsky then goes on to discuss various pieces of art that contain pagan themes which are turning into Christian ones. One such example he gives is the two reliefs on the facade of St. Mark's in Venice. One is a Roman work from the 3rd century, and the other is created 1,000 years later. They look so similar that it makes one think that the one created more recently was copied. The Roman work represents Hercules carrying a boar to King Eurystheus, the medieval master, by substituting billowy drapery for the lion's skin, this is Panofsky's words, a dragon for the frightened king, and a stag for the boar, transformed the mythological story into an allegory of salvation. So he talks a lot about how these pieces of work have borrowed from the classical or the mythological. And he ends his discussion on this by saying that the artists of the Renaissance had to strive for a new form of expression, stylistically and iconographically different from the classical as well as from the medieval, yet related and indebted to both. Alfred Barr, the development of abstract art. Barr graduated from Harvard and worked at the Museum of Modern Art, where he was director from 1929 to 1943. Barr is associated with the acceptance of modern art as part of the Western artistic tradition, especially in the United States. Barr provided us with what is now a standard part of art historical interpretation through his chart, The Development of Abstract Art, which organized styles of modern art in the ways in which they reacted to one another. Barr's chart begins with the year 1890, using examples of Japanese prints, Synthesism, Cezanne, and Neo-Impressionism, and ends with non-geometrical abstract art and geometrical abstract art. Barr's chart illustrates that any work of art can be attributed to a particular school or style, and that the character of a movement can be summed in a single name and its origins taken from a specific point, and that abstraction is the dominant form of modernism. Again, we talk about Erwin Panofsky. Panofsky defines humanism as an attitude of belief in the dignity of man, insisting on the values of rationality and freedom, and acknowledging the limitations of fallibility and frailty, and resulting in the ideas of responsibility and tolerance. Panofsky describes humanists as cultural historians who reject authority but respect tradition. According to Panofsky, art historians are humanists whose primary material is the work of art, and a work of art is any made object which has an aesthetic significance, whatever its chief intended purpose. Panofsky relates that from the humanist point of view, It is inevitable to distinguish between nature and culture and define nature by culture. He states that man's signs and structures are records because, or rather insofar as they express ideas separated from, yet realized by, the processes of signaling and building, and that from the humanistic point of view, human records do not age. Historical concepts are based on space and time, and records relating to these concepts have to be dated and located. Panofsky's methodology consists of 3 stages. Again, we hear a lot of the 3 stages in Panofsky. First, the observation and examination of natural phenomena and human records. The next one is that the above information, or the observation, must be decoded and interpreted. And lastly, the results have to be classified and coordinated into a coherent system that makes sense. Panofsky speaks of man-made objects as having intention, in order or not for them to be experienced aesthetically, and uses the analogy of a streetlight, stating that he would be acting against its intention if he experienced it aesthetically, instead of associating it with the idea of stepping on my brakes. When examining a work of art, we are affected by the 3 elements of materialized form, idea or subject matter, and content, and it is the unity of those 3 elements which is realized in the aesthetic experience. Panofsky also states that the naive beholder of art is different from the art historian, and that the art historian realizes the situation in which art is produced, and in his studies learns as much as possible about the circumstances under which the objects of his studies were created. Now we move on to Nicholas Pevsner. Due to his innovation and his research on the Buildings of England series, Pevsner is one of the few art historians to have become a household name. Pevsner is one of the few scholars to have influenced the art in their own time. He began his career in the universities of Dresden in Germany before coming to England in the 1930s, where he was professor of art history at the University of London. Pevsner defines the distinction between buildings and architecture by defining a building as a structure that encloses space and is large enough for humans to move about in, and architecture as a building constructed with aesthetics in mind. Pevsner states that an aesthetic experience may be caused by architecture in 3 ways. First, the manner in which all walls are treated, the proportions of windows, the relation of wall space to window space, and one story to another, and ornamentation. This is 2-dimensional, or the painter's way. Second, the treatment of the exterior of the space in relationship to the treatment of different qualities, such as roofs and domes, and the rhythm of projections and recessions. This way is 3-dimensional, or the sculptor's way. Third, the treatment of the interior, such as the layout of rooms and movement of staircases. This way is also 3-dimensional, but concerns the space in which humans move and is purely an attribute of architecture. Pevsner points out that architecture is different from painting and sculpture due to its spatial considerations, but adds, however, that it is not exclusively spatial. Pevsner believes that architecture is more comprehensive than painting and sculpture and has a right to claim superiority over them. Pevsner believes that the 19th century advance of easel painting over wall painting in architecture is evidence of a decline in the arts and Western civilization. In speaking of a 20th century revival of architecture, Pevsner points out that Greek and medieval art flourished when the architecture of the times was at the forefront. Pevsner views the fine arts as torn out of the common ground of life and points out the danger of the take it or leave it attitude, art for art's sake, stating that only architecture is bound up with the necessities of life. Pevsner points out that the evolution of architecture is not caused by function and construction, but by the changing spirits of changing ages. We're now moving into some of the optional videos that we could have watched this week. We also have some questions that we came up with based off of these videos, so if you want to watch this, great. If you want to skip the video summaries, you may. There are key terms and key people, and then also our forum questions at the end of this presentation, so if you want to fast forward through this, that's fine, or just keep on listening. So this is Erwin Panofsky's lecture that he gave at UCLA in 1967. This is a fascinating, albeit hard to hear and follow, audio recording of the lecture, text and images, some iconographical questions that Panofsky gave on November 20th, 1967. Panofsky, a renowned German art historian, presents his take on Titian's The Fall of Man. He reviews iconographical elements in two influential works to Titian's portrayal of the scene by Raphael and Dürer, and the later copy of Titian's work by Rubens in 1628. Rubens is noted as a copy for his own purposes, but perhaps the word study would be more appropriate. Note the lack of iconographic elements in Titian's work. Panofsky felt this denotes many problems with Titian's depiction. He compares and contrasts the icons in all of the works to show how Titian misrepresented biblical stories, the saints, and the important icons of salvation as a remedy to the problems posed by the topic. Some of the iconographic elements of Panofsky notes in these paintings, he says a fox is a symbol of luxury and often the devil himself. The hollyhock is curative powers and salvation. The parrot symbolizes medieval symbol of virgin birth of Christ. And the serpent equals the devil, or stands for the devil. And Rubens, his later copy of Titian's, included the parrot. This is St. John the Baptist from birth to beheading, also an optional video that we could watch. This is the first episode of 10 in the series. Dr. Jennifer Sawicka, a Howard and Roberta Amundsen Fellow in Art and Religion National Gallery in London, has an informative discussion with Professor Ben Quash, Director of the Center of Arts and the Sacred King's College in London. She gives him and us a tour of two of the National Gallery masterpieces that feature John the Baptist. They are pictured right here for us to look at. The first is Carlo Crivelli's The Demidoff Altarpiece from 1476, and then Piero della Francesca's The Baptism of Christ from 1450. The series takes a close look at who was John the Baptist and why has he been so important to artists and patrons over the centuries. They then go on to discuss how in her 4 years at the gallery she has noted over 120 works that note figures of John the Baptist, and John the Baptist is the one who arrives to proclaim the coming of Jesus Christ. Professor Quash notes he is one of the first saints or characters to appear in the New Testament gospel narratives, but is also a prophetic character of the Old Testament. And Dr. Sawicka says it represents continuity and change. In the Demidoff altarpiece, John the Baptist is represented on the left at the banks of the river versus the marble highlights for the saints and the rest of the design. They note how John the Baptist always stands out from other representations of the saints. He's different. In discussing his figure, they point out his frailty. From living in the desert areas, he is thin and clothed in camel skin. Professor Quash comments how he is also frequently depicted with a pointing gesture. He is a pointer. He is pointing to Christ. Dr. Swilka points out that he carries a reed cross, a premonition to the crucifixion, but also refers to John the Baptist's time baptizing at the River Jordan. They both note how the viewer is situated as though we are being baptized by John himself. In the Piero della Francesca of the Baptism of Christ, it depicts the culminating moment of John the Baptist's life. It depicts the beginning of Christ's ministry. And though here Christ is the central figure, John is always a step ahead, and most works depict him as preparing the way for Christ. In this lecture, Dr. Lev, it's titled The Development of Sacred Space in Rome, the Cradle of Christian Architecture. She walks the audience through the era when the churches were built with newfound freedom, following 250 years of persecution. She discusses how it was the victory of Constantine that led to the blossoming of Christianity. She outlines the philosophical and architectural influences that contributed to the uniqueness of Christian church. She details the historical background of the temples, synagogues, and mithraeums that influenced the interior and exterior designs and describes the alterations made in the Christian style of the Grecian basilicas. Though many of the original 25 churches were destroyed in the 4th century, much of the original architectural design is still held in high regard for churches built across the centuries. The Bishop of Caesarea, Eusebius, who is also known as the father of church history, noted how churches were built in a spirit of jubilation. God, inviting us in the following manner, sing to the Lord a new song. He hath done wonderful works. He was one of the few martyrs who lived to see the days of Constantine. 312 to 337 AD, when Christianity was legal and allowed to flourish. The early Christians, in their repression, held what is known as at-home services. In keeping with early Eucharistic liturgy, followers wished to keep the intimate nature of the home churches to the new buildings. They wanted to keep the focus of the church as a gathering place. So for the design of the early Christian churches, we see opposite components when compared to that of the temples, seen as places of persecution with some similarities to the synagogues, which were inclusive and open space to find connection to God, and no likely similarity to the cults of Mithras. Christians preferred elaborate interior designs, a central room for many parishioners to gather at the same level, an interior raised altar, and an open space that encouraged the connection of human to God. They did, however, like the temple theme of honoring victory, the victory of Christians converting to Romans through love, not violence, and winning their freedom to flourish in God. Constantine comes to Rome, October 28, 312. His victory was different. The triumph was in debt and honor to a new god, the Christian God, not one of the many pagan temple gods. For 250 years, Christians were under persecution in Rome, but Constantine gave them the money and space to create 25 parishes which provided baptisms, catechisms, etc. And they did not eradicate the temples. Many of the original 25 churches were destroyed later in the 4th century. Dr. Lev also discussed the philosophical influence of the temples and how the many temples were known well by the Christians as a place of persecution and false gods. Thus, temple design, construction, and philosophy was not of interest to them. Temples featured high foundations and columns to give the temple a higher than mortal feeling, and an exterior altar and gathering place to serve the gods in the sky. Pagan ritual celebrated the gap between divinity and man, Additionally, the exterior was more elaborate than the interior, which was bare with the exception of the chalice as an enclosed room with a statue of temple god was only for priests, again an element that separates the people from the deity. Here's the Etruscan temple and the Parthenon, Temple of Athena in 447 BC, often the site of Christian persecution and represented opulence and service to false gods. Here are some images of various churches, including the First Church of Rome, St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, St. John Lateran, 324, the influential architectural style, and then the bottom pictures are the outside and the inside of Basilica. So it's a humble exterior and a glorious interior. So Dr. Love's lecture was full of information. So if you didn't get a chance to watch that, it would be really great to do that. So our last video that we watched was the one by Professor Ben Quash, and it's Arts as Theological Medium. So the main topic of Professor Ben Quash's seminar is art as a theological medium. Some of the main themes in the discussion are questions on how does art become a medium for the communication of Christian ideas, as well as what is the theological power of images. Professor Quash speaks on the multidimensional approach of much of early Christian art of the medieval to the Renaissance periods. In the example of Zaganelli's The Baptism of Christ in 1514, contains within it multiple biblical references to witness of Christ. This painting was also an altarpiece which would have been seen and engaged during the sacraments during the liturgy. Professor Quash explains that art engages not only our intellect, but our emotions. He also suggests that though some of early Christian art may not be biblically founded, it is important for viewers, and especially for Christians today, to try to identify what early Christians at the time were trying to explore about their faith. He suggests that within these artistic expressions are themes that we can relate to today, such as discipleship. Art as a theological medium was, as Professor Quash called it, a battlefield where people would work out and test their theology as well as refute others. Art for the artists of the medieval period to the Renaissance may not always require that a work illustrate empirically the content and imagery of the Bible, but also allows for an imaginative expression of the possibility of personal thoughts and ideas about the artist or the patron, as in the use of creative license in Carpaccio's The Preparation for the Entombment of Christ, Meditation on the Dead Christ. Professor Quash, towards the end of his seminar, proposes the ideas not Christian art may also serve as an entry point, such as with the work by Tracy Emin, For You, as an invitation to express one's love for God and to a contemplation of God. That concludes our summaries for the readings and the optional videos. We put together some key terms. Feel free to pause, look over the terms, take notes as you need. Here are also some key people that we came across throughout our reading. And here are our proposed forum questions. I believe there are 9 total to choose from. So read through them, pick ones that you would like to post and have a discussion on our forums. I will also post these in the forum, so you don't need to continually go back to this video.